Kale's head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache as he regained consciousness on the cold, damp stone floor. The air felt heavy and alien, carrying unfamiliar scents of mineral dust and something acrid that caught in his throat. Through the narrow slits of a barred window high above, twin beams of harsh light penetrated the gloom of his cell, one golden, one with an unsettling reddish tinge. This wasn't his ship. The memory flashed back. The salvage mission near the outer rim, the unexpected patrol vessel, the desperate evasive maneuvers that had sent his small craft spinning into the gravitational pull of an uncharted planet. Then darkness. The sound of heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the jangling of metal. Kale scrambled his feet just as the cell door swung open, revealing two towering figures that made him instinctively step back. They stood at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful frames. But it was their skin that captivated his attention, deep gray with subtle patterns like slate stone, marked with ceremonial scarification that seemed to glow faintly with an inner light. Their eyes, completely black except for pinpoints of amber in the center, regarded him with cold disdain. "Move, earth filth," one of them commanded in strangely accented English. Kale didn't question how they knew his origin or language. Right now, survival was his only concern. They marched him through winding corridors carved into what appeared to be a massive stone structure. Other cells they passed contained creatures of various species, some humanoid, others decidedly not, all looking equally miserable and defeated. The path sloped gradually upward until they emerged into bright, painful light. Kale squinted as his eyes adjusted to reveal an enormous amphitheater, its tiered seating filled with thousands of the slate-skinned beings, their excited murmurs creating a sound like distant thunder. The arena floor beneath his feet was stained with suspicious dark patches that centuries of sand couldn't fully disguise. "Welcome to Kthar," his guard sneered, shoving him forward into a holding pen with several other prisoners. "Try to die entertainingly for the glory of the Forelag." The next hour passed in a blur of terror and confusion as Kale observed the brutal spectacle unfolding. Prisoners were released in groups to fight against each other or against trained Forelag warriors. Few survived more than minutes. The crowd roared with approval at particularly violent deaths, their deep voices shaking the very foundation of the arena. Then came his turn. A horn sounded, and the gate before him slid open. With guard spears at his back, Kale had no choice but to stumble forward into the arena along with 5 other prisoners. A reptilian being with 4 arms, 2 insectoid creatures with chitinous exoskeletons, and 2 humanoids whose species he couldn't identify. "Today's entertainment continues with the Hunt of 6, boomed a voice from a high platform where an elaborately adorned Forelag presided. "Release the challenger." From the opposite side of the arena, another gate lifted. Kale expected some monstrous creature, but instead, a lone figure emerged. Another Forelag, but smaller than most he'd seen, clearly female based on her more lithe frame. She wore armor that once might have been ornate, but now showed signs of damage and hasty repair. Despite this, she carried herself with unmistakable pride. In her hands was a gleaming spear that caught the light of the twin suns, its shaft adorned with intricate symbols, and its blade a strange, translucent material that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Something about her was different from the other Forelag. The way the crowd's reaction shifted from excitement to a more complicated mix of emotions: contempt, fascination, and perhaps even pity. "Lyra Kvar, former noble of House Kvar, continues her punishment," the announcer proclaimed. 6 against 1. Perhaps today she will finally face the consequence of her treachery. The prisoners looked at each other uncertainly, but the insectoids, perhaps driven by survival instinct, charged first. The Forelag woman, Lyra, moved with unexpected grace. Her spear flashed, catching one of the insectoids mid-leap and sending it crashing to the ground. The second creature managed to score a glancing blow with its clawed appendage, drawing a line of silvery blood across her arm. The reptilian being, seeing opportunity, attacked from behind while Lyra was engaged. She spun just in time to avoid a fatal blow, but was thrown off balance. The other prisoners, seeing her vulnerability, joined the attack, surrounding her in a tightening circle. Cale hung back. He had no desire to kill anyone, especially someone fighting for their life against impossible odds. As he watched Lyra battle with increasing desperation, he noticed something troubling. Her spear, though beautiful, had a hairline fracture running along its shaft. Every impact made it flex dangerously. A vicious blow from the reptilian sent Lyra stumbling backward. She recovered quickly, but the strain proved too much for her weapon. With a sound like breaking crystal, the spear snapped near its head, leaving her holding a useless shaft while the bladed portion clattered to the sand several feet away. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A collective intake of breath followed by excited murmuring. Lyra's eyes widened in horror, not just at her defenselessness, but at something deeper, as if the breaking of the spear held significance beyond the tactical disadvantage. Her attackers closed in for the kill, the reptilian being raising all four arms for a finishing blow. Something inside Cale snapped. Perhaps it was basic human decency, or maybe just the refusal to participate in such a one-sided slaughter. Without consciously deciding to act, he found himself sprinting across the sand, diving past the surprise attackers to snatch up the fallen spearhead. Its weight surprised him, heavier than it looked, with an odd balance that nonetheless felt strangely right in his hand. He positioned himself in front of the fallen four-leg woman, wielding the broken weapon like a short sword. "Back off," he shouted, slashing at the reptilian being, who retreated in surprise. The other prisoners hesitated, confused by this unexpected development. That's when Cale noticed the silence. The roaring crowd had gone completely quiet. Every four-leg in a massive arena was staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to outrage, to something that looked almost like religious awe. The reptilian, sensing the shift in atmosphere, backed away further. The insectoid that remained upright chittered uncertainly to its companions. Even the announcer seemed struck speechless. Then, a single four-leg voice called out a phrase in their language, which was quickly picked up by others until it became a chant that filled the arena. Cale couldn't understand the words, but their effect was immediate. Armed guards poured into the arena, not attacking, but forming a protective circle around Cale and Lyra. "What did I do?" Cale whispered, still holding the broken spear point defensively. Lyra looked at him with an expression of shock, gratitude, and what might have been fear. "You don't know?" she replied in perfect English. "You invoked the ancient law by taking up my broken ancestral spear to protect me in mortal combat." She swallowed hard. "You have become my oath-sworn protector." Before Cale could process this, the guards closed in, securing both of them with strange, glowing restraints. They were not rough, but their manner suggested no possibility of resistance. As they were escorted from the arena, Cale caught a final glimpse of the crowd. Some appeared outraged, others fascinated, and a few, he could swear, looked afraid. Whatever he had done, Cale realized he had just changed the game entirely. The cell they were placed in was different from Cale's previous accommodation. Larger, cleaner, and with two sleeping platforms instead of a bare floor. The energy shackles that bound them allowed limited movement, but kept them tethered to each other at a distance of about 10 feet. Through a small window, the dual suns of Xylos cast strange, overlapping shadows across the stone floor. "You shouldn't have done that," Lyra said finally, breaking the tense silence that had persisted since their removal from the arena. "Though I'm grateful for my life. I didn't know I was doing whatever it is I did," Cale replied, examining the strange restraints around his wrists. "What exactly is an oath-sworn protector?" Lyra sighed, settling onto one of the platforms. Even in captivity, she maintained a regal posture that spoke of her noble origins. "The Kvar spear is not merely a weapon. It is an ancestral artifact passed down through generations of my family line, imbued with the essence of our history and honor. According to the ancient law, laws that predate even our written history, if a warrior's sacred weapon breaks in mortal combat and another takes it up to defend them, a blood bond is formed. She fixed him with her amber-flecked eyes. You are now bound to me by the oldest laws of my people. My honor is your honor. My battles are your battles. Kale stared at her in disbelief. You're saying that because I picked up a broken spear, I'm what? Your bodyguard for life. It is more complex than that. The position of oath-sworn grants you certain rights and authorities under four-lag law that no outsider has ever held. It is. She seemed to search for words. Unprecedented for a non-four-lag to hold such a position. Before Kale could ask more questions, a distant boom rattled the walls, followed by shouting and the sound of running feet. What was that? Kale asked, moving toward the window. Lyra joined him, her expression alert. Sounds like an attack or uprising. This could be our chance. She examined the energy. Shackles binding them. These restraints are coded to our biometrics. There's no removing them without authorization, but they won't stop us from moving if we stay within range of each other. Another explosion, closer this time, sent dust sifting down from the ceiling. The sounds of combat echoed through the corridors. If we're going to escape, it has to be now, Lyra said with sudden urgency. The main forces will be responding to whatever threat is attacking. The prison will be minimally guarded. You know a way out? Kale asked. A hint of a smile touched Lyra's lips. I was born in this citadel, human. I know every passage, including those forgotten by most. She lowered her voice. There's a drainage system beneath us that leads to the outer perimeter. If we can reach it, the decision wasn't difficult. Stay and face whatever fate the four-lag had in store for him, or take a chance with this warrior woman who at least seemed to value his life. Lead the way, Kale said. Using a loose stone pried from the wall, they managed to force the cell door latch during a particularly loud explosion that masked the sound of breaking metal. The corridor outside was deserted, the guards apparently called away to deal with the disturbance. Lyra moved with silent efficiency, guiding them through service passages and narrow maintenance tunnels. Twice they had to hide as patrols of armed four-lag rushed past. The restraints made movement awkward, forcing them to stay close and coordinate their actions. Down here, Lyra whispered, pulling aside a decorative grate that concealed a narrow shaft. This connects to the underground aqueduct. It'll be wet and dark, but it leads outside the city walls. The journey through the aqueduct was a nightmare of cold, rushing water, near-complete darkness, and the constant fear of discovery. The shackles, at least, provided enough illumination to prevent them from missing their footing on the treacherous stone pathways that ran alongside the water channels. After what seemed like hours of careful progress, they emerged through a rusted maintenance hatch into the harsh daylight of Xylos. They found themselves at the base of a massive cliff, the imposing walls of the four-lag city rising hundreds of feet above them. Beyond stretched a vast, alien landscape. Rocky plateaus dotted with strange, twisted vegetation and shades of deep purple and blue, all under the relentless glare of the twin suns. We need to get as far from the city as possible before they organize a proper search, Lyra said, already scanning the horizon for the best route. The outer wastes are dangerous, but they offer our best chance of avoiding capture. What exactly is out there? Kale asked, eyeing the forbidding terrain. Predators. Nomadic four-lag clans who may or may not respect the ancient laws. Environmental hazards. She glanced at him. But first, we need water and shelter. The twin suns will kill you quickly if you're not protected. Your skin is too thin for this world. They set off across the rocky terrain, keeping to shadows where possible. Kale's earthborn physiology struggled with a higher gravity and thinner atmosphere, but adrenaline and the very real fear of recapture kept him moving. By the time the larger sun began to set, leaving its smaller, reddish companion still high in the sky, they had traveled several miles from the city. Lyra led them to a cluster of rock formations that formed a natural shelter. We'll rest here, she decided, examining a small, thorny plant growing in the shadow of the rocks. She carefully harvested several bulbous protrusions from its stem. These contain water and some nutrients. Not ideal, but they'll keep us alive. Kale watched as she skillfully sliced open one of the bulbs with her sharp nails, revealing a gelatinous interior that glistened in the fading light. "How did you end up in the arena?" he asked as she handed him a portion. "You mentioned being noble-born." Lyra's face hardened. "Politics. Betrayal. The usual forces that topple those in power." She stared out at the alien landscape. "My uncle, Drazik, seized control of House Kvar after orchestrating my father's death. He couldn't execute me openly without violating our house traditions, so he fabricated charges of treason and had me sentenced to the arena instead." Her eyes flashed with barely contained fury. "I was meant to die quickly and be forgotten. Instead, I survived for nearly a full cycle. And now we are both fugitives. Drazik will want me dead more than ever, especially after what happened in the arena." The ancient law you invoked complicates his claim to leadership. She looked at him with renewed intensity. "And you are an unprecedented anomaly. Some will view you as an abomination, a non-Forlag daring to claim the rights of the Oathsworn. Others may see you as a fulfillment of old prophecies or a symbol of change." "I didn't ask for any of this," Kale said bitterly. "I was just trying to survive, to get back home. Yet here you are, bound to me by laws older than either of our civilizations." Lyra held up her shackled wrist. "For better or worse, our fates are now intertwined." As night fully descended, bringing with it a dramatic temperature drop, they huddled closer for warmth in their rocky shelter. Above them, unfamiliar constellations wheeled slowly across the sky, a constant reminder to Kale of just how far he was from home. The days that followed established a grim routine of survival. They traveled by night when the temperature was bearable for Kale, taking shelter during the scorching daylight hours. Lyra taught him which plants contained drinkable water, which rocks might harbor venomous creatures, and how to move silently across the rocky terrain. In return, Kale shared what little he could of practical value. Some basic knowledge of Earth technology that occasionally helped with improvising tools or solutions to immediate problems. Their restraints remained a constant challenge, keeping them literally bound together and limiting their options. Yet gradually, this forced proximity began to erode the walls between them. Survival required trust, coordination, and eventually, genuine cooperation. On the fifth night, as they rested in the shadow of a towering rock formation shaped like a twisted hand reaching toward the sky, Lyra finally asked about Earth. "Is it true your world has only one sun?" Kale nodded, feeling a wave of homesickness. "And one moon, not the three you have here. It must be cold and dark," she mused. "It's beautiful," Kale replied softly. "Oceans that stretch beyond the horizon. Forests so dense with life you can barely move through them. Cities that glow at night, like constellations brought down to Earth. You miss it, every minute." He looked at her. "What about you? Do you miss your home?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "I miss what it should have been, what it could be." Her voice hardened. "House Kvar ruled with honor for generations before my uncle poisoned it with his ambition. It was my birthright to lead our people toward a better future, one less bound by rigid traditions that no longer serve us." "Is that why they called you a traitor? Because you want to change?" "Partly. I questioned the practice of ritual combat for settling disputes. I suggested that we might benefit from more diplomatic relations with other species." Her mouth curved in a bitter smile. Dangerous ideas in a warrior culture that prides itself on isolation. A sudden noise, the subtle displacement of stones, brought their conversation to an abrupt halt. Both tensed, scanning the darkness around them. "We're not alone," Lyra whispered, reaching for a sharpened stone she'd been carrying as a makeshift weapon. A gravelly voice spoke from the shadows in the Forlag language. Lyra responded cautiously, keeping her body positioned protectively in front of Kale. An ancient Forlag emerged into the dim light of Xylos's smallest moon. His slate skin was deeply etched with age and ceremonial scars, and he leaned heavily on a staff adorned with strange symbols. Unlike the Forlag from the city, he wore simple garments of rough-spun fabric rather than armor or formal attire. "He says he means us no harm," Lyra translated quietly. He is Morvac, an elder seer of the Korthan clan. They are nomads who still follow the old ways. The old forelag spoke again, his gaze fixed intently on Kale, particularly on the energy shackles binding him to Lyra. He says he recognized our presence. Since the activation of the ancient bond, Lyra continued, a note of surprise in her voice. He wishes to offer us sanctuary for the night. His clan camp is nearby. Can we trust him? Kale asked warily. The Korthan are traditionalists who revere the ancient laws above all else. If he has recognized you as oath-sworn. She hesitated. It may be our best chance to learn more about what this bond truly means. And we need allies. The nomad camp was hidden in a deep ravine, invisible until they were practically upon it. Unlike the imposing stone architecture of the Forelag city, the Korthan dwelled in circular structures made from a combination of animal hides and the fibrous material of local plants, all arranged in a precise pattern around a central fire pit. Their arrival caused a stir among the clan members, who emerged from their dwellings to stare in fascination at the strange pair. Children, smaller versions of their parents with slightly smoother skin, peeked out from behind protective adults, their curiosity overcoming their initial fear. Morvac led them to the central fire, where several elder forelags sat in a semicircle. He spoke at length, gesturing occasionally toward Kale and Lyra and their binding shackles. The elders listened intently, sometimes nodding or murmuring among themselves. Finally, a female elder, her skin bearing intricate patterns of ceremonial scarification that covered nearly every visible inch, addressed Lyra directly. She wishes to examine the bond, Lyra translated for Kale, and she wishes to see what remains of the Kfar's spear. Lyra reached into a hidden pocket in her armor and produced the broken spear point that Kale had wielded in the arena. In the firelight, it gleamed with an inner luminescence, the strange crystalline material catching and amplifying the flames. The female elder took it with reverent care, turning it over in her hands while chanting softly. The other elders joined in, creating a haunting harmony that made the hairs on Kale's arms stand on end. After what seemed an eternity, the chanting stopped. The female elder returned the spear point to Lyra and then, to Kale's surprise, reached out to touch the energy shackles binding them together. The moment her fingers made contact, the shackles flickered and then, with a soft chime, deactivated and fell away. Kale stared in shock at his freed wrist. How did she... The technology of our restraints is based on ancient principles the Korthan still understand, Lyra explained, equally surprised. They reject modern applications but retain the knowledge. The female elder spoke again, at length, her gaze moving between the two of them. She says the bond between us is genuine, Lyra translated slowly, as if processing the information herself. When you took up my broken spear in my defense, it recognized your intent and spirit. The ancient law was invoked in its purest form, not through ceremony or ritual, but through action born of honor. Kale noticed she hesitated before the word honor, as if the elder had used a term with no precise equivalent in English. She says more, Lyra continued, her voice growing more hesitant. The oath-sworn protector is not merely a guardian, but holds authority equal to the one they protect. You could, by ancient right, challenge my uncle for leadership of House Kfar. Kale laughed incredulously, then quickly sobered when he realized she was serious. That's insane. I'm not even Fordak. Why would anyone follow me? It's not about following you, Lyra explained. It's about respecting the ancient law. Many would resist, certainly, but others, especially clans like the Korthan who maintain the old ways, would be bound by tradition to acknowledge your claim. Her eyes sparked with a new intensity. Don't you see? This changes everything. Before Kale could respond, Morvac approached with bowls of steaming liquid. The smell was unfamiliar but not unpleasant, earthy with hints of spice. After days of survival on minimal water and whatever nutrition they could extract from desert plants, the prospect of a real meal was too tempting to refuse. As they ate, Morvac spoke again, and this time his tone carried unmistakable warning. He says we were followed, Lyra translated tensely, not by regular city guards, but by shade-step hunters, elite trackers loyal to the high houses. Likely my uncles. How close? Kale asked, setting down his bowl. Too close. They will reach this area by morning. The clan has already begun preparations to move deeper into the wastes. She hesitated. Morvac offers us two options: travel with them or continue our journey with supplies and guidance toward the Temple of Ascension. What's the Temple of Ascension? An ancient site sacred to all Forlag, where the first laws were supposedly handed down by our ancestors. It is neutral ground where no blood may be shed. Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. It is also where new clan leaders traditionally travel to receive blessing and recognition. If we could reach it, your uncle's hunters would be waiting for us along the way, Kale pointed out. Yes, but they could not touch us within the temple itself. And if we could present ourselves to the temple guardians, invoke the right of challenge. She shook her head. It would be dangerous, perhaps impossible. And going with the nomads? Safer immediately, but it would not address the larger threat. My uncle would continue hunting us, and the Corps that would eventually pay a price for sheltering us. Kale considered their options. Every part of him wanted to find the safest path, to somehow make his way off this hostile planet and back to Earth. Yet something about Lyra's cause resonated with him. The wrongness of her situation, the injustice of her exile. And whether he liked it or not, he was now bound to her fate through this strange ancient law. Temple of Ascension, Kale decided finally. If there's a chance to end this rather than just keep running, I say we take it. Lyra studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We leave before dawn. The Corps then proved generous, providing them with water containers, nutrient-dense travel rations, and clothing better suited to the harsh environment. For Kale, they fashioned a hooded garment that would protect his more vulnerable skin from the binary suns. Morvac himself gifted Lyra with a simple but effective knife of Forlag manufacture. Most precious of all, they were given a crude map etched onto a piece of cured hide, showing the route to the Temple of Ascension through the treacherous terrain of the outer wastes. 3 days' journey if we move quickly, Lyra said, studying the map by the light of the dying fire. Through the crystal canyons and across the singing dunes. Sounds poetic, Kale remarked. The names are deceptive. The crystal canyons are filled with razor-sharp formations that can slice through flesh with the slightest contact. The singing dunes are named for the sound the wind makes through hollow rock formations, a sound that drives some travelers to madness. Charming. This is the shortest route, avoiding major settlements and military outposts. The alternatives would add days to our journey. Then we go through the poetically named death traps, Kale said resignedly. What's the plan once we reach this temple? Lyra's expression grew serious. According to the ancient law, as my oath sworn, you have the right to issue a formal challenge to my uncle on my behalf. Such a challenge, made on consecrated ground, cannot be refused without the challenger forfeiting all honor and position. So I challenge him, and then what? We fight to the death. Not necessarily. The challenge can take many forms. Combat, yes, but also trials of wisdom, endurance, or judgment by the temple guardians. She met his eyes directly. But make no mistake, Drazik will do everything in his power to ensure it never reaches that point. He will try to kill us long before we reach the temple. As if to emphasize her point, a distant howl echoed across the wasteland. Not the cry of a natural creature, but something that raised gooseflesh on Kale's arms. Void hounds, Lyra whispered, her face paling slightly. Bioengineered hunting beasts. They've picked up our trail sooner than I feared. The camp erupted into controlled activity, the Corps then breaking down their dwellings with practiced efficiency. Morvac approached them urgently, speaking rapid-fire Forlag. We need to leave now, Lyra translated, already gathering their meager supplies. The clan will head north, creating multiple false trails. We go east, toward the rising suns. They slipped away from the dispersing camp, guided initially by the oldest of the Corps, then children who knew paths invisible to untrained eyes. As the first hints of dawn colored the alien sky, the child left them at the entrance to a narrow canyon lined with crystalline formations that caught the early light and fragmented it into thousands of rainbow shards. The crystal canyons, Lyra confirmed, stay exactly in the center of the path. Touch nothing along the walls. The canyon proved to be every bit as dangerous as promised. The crystalline formations weren't merely sharp. They seemed almost alive, some growing visibly at the edges, as if reaching out for unwary travelers. The path through them twisted and narrowed unpredictably, sometimes forcing them to turn sideways to squeeze through gaps barely wider than their bodies. By midday, the heat within the canyon had become nearly unbearable, the crystals magnifying the sun's rays into searing beams that crisscrossed their path. Kale's Earth-adapted physiology struggled, his breathing labored, and his vision occasionally blurring. Not much further, Lyra encouraged, her own slate skin glistening with exertion. The canyon opens to the singing dunes soon. A distant howl echoed through the canyon, bouncing off the crystal walls and seeming to come from everywhere at once. "They're still on our trail," Kale gasped. "Yes, but they'll move carefully through the canyon. The crystals are as dangerous to them as to us. It buys us time." When they finally emerged from the canyon into open territory, Kale nearly collapsed with relief. The landscape before them was different from the rocky wastes they'd traversed earlier. A vast expanse of purplish-black sand dunes stretching to the horizon, interrupted occasionally by towering stone spires riddled with holes of varying sizes. As the wind gusted across the bizarre landscape, an eerie sound emanated from the spires, a haunting melody that rose and fell in patterns just familiar enough to suggest meaning while remaining fundamentally alien. "The singing dunes," Lyra confirmed. "We must cross before nightfall. After dark, the temperature drops to levels that would kill us both without proper shelter." They set out across the strange terrain, the sand shifting treacherously beneath their feet, sometimes seeming to flow like liquid rather than solid matter. The constant, otherworldly melody from the stone spires played at the edges of Kale's consciousness, sometimes seeming to form words or phrases just beyond comprehension. "Don't listen too closely," Lyra warned, noticing his distraction. "The song affects different species in different ways, but none positively with prolonged exposure. Focus on my voice, on our path forward." By late afternoon, they had made it halfway across the vast expanse of dunes. The twin suns hung low on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows behind them. Kale was just beginning to hope they might make it to the far side before nightfall when Lyra suddenly froze, raising one hand in warning. "We're not alone," she whispered. They dropped low behind a dune crest. In the distance, moving systematically across the sands, were figures that even at this range were clearly forelag, but unlike any Kale had seen before. They wore sleek, form-fitting armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and moved with an unnaturally fluid grace. "Shadow Legion," Lyra breathed, her voice tight with fear. "My uncle's personal guard. Elite killers trained from birth for one purpose, to eliminate House Kvar's enemies. Can we go around them? They've deployed in a search pattern. They know we're in the dunes." She studied the terrain with calculation. "Our only advantage is the coming darkness. They'll expect us to seek shelter, to stop moving. We must do the opposite." "You said the night temperatures are lethal," Kale reminded her. "They are, without proper protection." Lyra reached into the pack the Korthan had provided, pulling out what looked like a tightly folded bundle of fabric. "Thermal wraps. The nomads included two, designed to trap body heat during desert nights. If we share one, we might survive long enough to slip past the search perimeter under cover of darkness." It was a desperate plan, but Kale saw no alternatives. As the larger sun disappeared completely and the smaller began its final descent, they activated the thermal wrap, a strange fabric that grew warm to the touch when exposed to air, and huddled close, pulling it around both their bodies. Moving like this was awkward, requiring them to coordinate every step, but the growing darkness and their shared body heat inside the wrap helped shield them from the rapidly plummeting temperature. The singing of the stone spires changed with nightfall, dropping to lower, more resonant tones that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath their feet. They moved slowly but steadily, using the search pattern of the Shadow Legion against them. Whenever a pair of guards moved forward, Kale and Lyra slipped through the gap they left behind, always staying downwind to avoid detection by the void hounds that occasionally passed nearby, their unnatural forms barely visible in the darkness. Hours passed in this tense, exhausting progress. Even with the thermal wrap, the cold began to seep into their bones. Kale's extremities grew numb, and he could feel Lyra shivering against him despite her species' greater resilience to temperature extremes. Just when Kale thought they couldn't continue any longer, the terrain began to change. The dunes gave way to more solid ground, and in the distance, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, rose what appeared to be massive stepped pyramids arranged in a perfect circle. The Temple of Ascension, Lyra confirmed, her voice barely audible over her chattering teeth. We made it. Dawn was breaking as they approached the ancient structure, its massive stones glowing gold and crimson in the light of the rising suns. No obvious guards were visible, but Kale sensed they were being watched from the moment they stepped onto the wide, ceremonial approach. The temple complex was even more impressive up close. 7-step pyramids arranged in a perfect circle around a central courtyard, each pyramid representing one of the original Four-Lag clans, according to Lyra. Ancient symbols covered every surface, worn by time, but still legible to those trained in the old ways. What now? Kale asked as they paused at the base of the main stairway, leading up to the central courtyard. Before Lyra could answer, figures materialized from recessed doorways along the perimeter. Four-Lag wearing ceremonial robes of deep indigo, their slate skin bearing elaborate silver markings unlike any Kale had seen before. Temple Guardians, Lyra whispered. They maintain the sacred ground and interpret the ancient laws. One of the Guardians, distinguished by a headdress of metallic filaments that caught the light of the rising suns, approached them. He spoke in the Four-Lag language, his tone formal but not hostile. He welcomes us to the Temple of Ascension, Lyra translated, but questions our purpose here, especially. She hesitated. Especially the presence of a non-Four-Lag on sacred ground. Kale looked to Lyra, uncertain how to respond. This was her world, her culture. He was merely caught in the tide of events set in motion days ago in the arena. Drawing herself up to her full height, Lyra responded in her native tongue, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of her noble upbringing. She gestured to Kale and then produced the broken spear point, holding it up so that it caught the light of the twin suns. The Guardian's reaction was immediate, a slight step back, eyes widening as they fixed on the crystalline fragment. Other Guardians moved closer, murmuring among themselves. I told them who I am, Lyra explained quietly to Kale, that you are my oath sworn under the ancient law, and that we have come to invoke the right of challenge against Drazik Kvar for leadership of my house. The Guardian spoke again, his tone more respectful but still cautious. They will convene the Council of Elders to verify our claim, Lyra translated. It is unprecedented for a human to invoke such rights. They were escorted up the massive stairway and into the central courtyard, a perfectly circular space paved with intricately carved stone tiles. In the exact center stood a raised dais supporting what appeared to be a ceremonial fire pit, though it currently lay cold and empty. Around the edges of the courtyard, 7 ornate thrones stood equidistant from each other, each carved from a different material, representing the 7 founding clans. Most were empty, but 3 were occupied by elderly Four-Lag whose ceremonial garb and elaborate skin markings identified them as elders of the highest rank. Remain silent unless directly addressed, Lyra advised as they were led before the seated elders. Let me speak first. What followed was a formal exchange in the Four-Lag language, with Lyra presenting their case while the elders listened impassively. Occasionally, they would interject with questions or comments, their ancient eyes frequently shifting to study Kale with undisguised curiosity. Finally, the eldest of the three, a female forelag with skin so deeply etched by time and ritual that it resembled weathered stone, extended one long-fingered hand. "She requests the spear fragment," Lyra whispered. Kale nodded, and Lyra presented the broken weapon with formal reverence. The elder took it carefully, closing her eyes as her fingers curled around the crystalline blade. For several long moments, she remained motionless, as if listening to something only she could hear. When her eyes opened again, she spoke a single phrase that caused a ripple of reaction among the guardians present. "She acknowledges the bond," Lyra translated, a note of relief in her voice. "The ancient law has been invoked truly. You are recognized as my oath sworn." The elder continued speaking, her voice gaining strength as she addressed not just them, but all present in the courtyard. "She says that according to the law, you have the right to issue challenge on my behalf against any who have wronged me or my honor," Lyra continued, "including challenge for leadership of House Kvar." The elder handed the spear fragment back, but instead of returning it to Lyra, she extended it toward Kale, clearly indicating he should take it. Surprised, Kale accepted the fragment, feeling its strange weight and balance once again. "It belongs to you now as much as to me," Lyra explained. "The physical manifestation of our bond." Before further discussion could occur, a commotion at the entrance to the courtyard drew everyone's attention. A new group of forelag had arrived, heavily armed warriors wearing the ornate armor of House Kvar, led by a commanding figure whose elaborate armor and bearing marked him as someone of high rank. "Drazik," Lyra hissed, her body tensing immediately. Kale studied the newcomer with intense focus. Drazik Kvar was taller than most forelag, his slate skin bearing elaborate scarification that seemed deliberately designed to intimidate. His eyes, when they fixed on Lyra, held such cold hatred that Kale instinctively moved closer to her. Drazik strode forward with the confidence of one accustomed to deference, flanked by 4 members of what Kale assumed was the Shadow Legion. He stopped several paces away, surveying them with contempt before addressing the elders directly. The exchange that followed was heated, with Drazik's voice rising while the elders maintained their ceremonial calm. Though Kale couldn't understand the words, the dynamics were clear. Drazik was objecting to their presence, perhaps to the very validity of Kale's status. "He claims the ancient law cannot apply to a human," Lyra whispered, "that it's a desecration of our traditions." The female elder responded firmly, gesturing to the spear fragment in Kale's hand. Whatever she said caused Drazik's face to darken with rage. "The elders have confirmed your position as oath sworn," Lyra continued, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "They say the spear itself has accepted you, and they cannot contradict what the ancestors have ordained." Drazik switched tactics, now addressing Lyra directly in heavily accented English, clearly for Kale's benefit. "Niece," he said, the term sounding like an insult in his mouth, "you bring shame upon our house yet again. First with your radical ideas, then by surviving the arena, and now by binding yourself to this earth creature through perverted use of our most sacred laws. The only perversion here is your seizure of my birthright," Lyra replied evenly. "My father's blood still stains your hands, Drazik, though you hid the evidence well enough to convince the council." "Treasonous lies," Drazik snarled, then turned his attention to Kale. "And you, human, do you even comprehend what you've stumbled into? The forces you're meddling with? The Kvar line has ruled through strength for millennia. Our sacred spear was forged in the blood of the first ancestors. It is not a toy for aliens to play with." Kale met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated despite the very real danger radiating from the forelag warlord. "I understand enough," he replied. "I understand honor. I understand loyalty. And I understand that Lyra deserves justice." Drazik laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Justice? What do you know of forelag justice, creature? Our justice is written in blood and fire, carried out with steel and strength." He turned back to the elders. "This farce has gone on long enough. The human cannot possibly fulfill the requirements of the oath sworn. He should be removed from sacred ground immediately. The female elder responded with quiet authority, and even without understanding her words, Kale could sense Drazik's growing frustration. She says the ancient law makes no distinction based on species. Lyra translated. That the spear chose you, and their role is to interpret the law, not rewrite it to suit political convenience. The elder continued speaking, her gaze moving between Drazik and Kale. She says, Lyra's voice faltered slightly. She says that according to the oldest traditions, the matter must be settled by trial of ascension. As my oath sworn, you have the right to challenge Drazik for leadership of House Kvar. If you refuse or fail, both our claims are forfeit forever. What exactly is the trial of ascension? Kale asked quietly. A ritual combat that takes place on the sacred apex, Lyra explained, nodding toward the highest of the 7 pyramids. It's not just physical battle, but a test deemed appropriate by the elders to determine worthiness to lead. And if I win, then you become the technical head of House Kvar, though tradition would allow you to name me as your representative to actually govern. Drazik interrupted with another harsh laugh. When you lose, human, both you and my treasonous niece will be executed for desecration of sacred law. I will ensure your deaths are remembered for generations as examples of what happens to those who defile our ways. The female elder raised her hand, silencing further argument. She spoke again, addressing the entire assembly. The trial is set for tomorrow's dual sunrise, Lyra translated. Until then, we are granted sanctuary within the temple grounds, where no harm may come to us under pain of eternal dishonor. Drazik's eyes narrowed dangerously. Enjoy your final night, he said softly. Tomorrow, I will personally send you both to join the ancestors you have so gravely offended. With that, he turned and strode from the courtyard, his guards falling in behind him. As the tension in the courtyard gradually dissipated, Kale felt the weight of what had just transpired settling on his shoulders. I'm not a warrior, he said quietly to Lyra. Not like you or him. I've never even been in a real fight before the arena. The trial is not necessarily about physical combat, Lyra replied, though her expression betrayed her concern. The elders will design it based on their assessment of both challenger and challenged. It could incorporate elements of wisdom, judgment, spiritual awareness. Somehow I doubt your uncle will agree to a battle of wits, Kale noted dryly. No, Drazik will push for traditional combat. She placed a hand on his arm. But regardless of the form, I would not ask you to face this alone. There may be a way. Before she could elaborate, the Guardians approached to escort them to their quarters for the night, a small but dignified chamber within one of the lesser pyramids, furnished with sleeping platforms and basic amenities. Once they were alone, Lyra began pacing the small space, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. The spear, she said suddenly. The Kvar spear isn't just a weapon. It's a repository of our family's history, knowledge, and power. Even broken, it contains essence that can be accessed by those bound to it. You mean it's alive somehow? Kale asked, examining the crystalline fragment with new wariness. Not alive as you would understand it, but imbued with the collective strength and wisdom of generations of Kvar leaders. She sat beside him, her expression intense. When we bonded through the ancient law, the spear recognized you. It accepted you. That means its power is accessible to you too, if you can learn to reach it in one night, before I face your homicidal uncle in mortal combat tomorrow. Lyra's determination didn't waver. We have no choice but to try. The nomad spoke of this possibility, that the oath-sworn bond goes deeper than mere legal status. It creates a true connection between warrior, protector, and ancestral weapon. With night falling, they sat cross-legged on the floor, the broken spear point placed between them. Under Lyra's guidance, Kale closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, trying to empty his mind of fear and doubt. Visualize your connection to the spear, Lyra instructed softly. Feel the bond that formed in the arena when you chose to protect me. That moment of pure intent, free from calculation or self-interest. Kale tried, concentrating on recalling that instant when something deeper than conscious thought had driven him to act. Minute after minute passed with nothing happening, his frustration growing as the precious hours before dawn slipped away. "It's not working," he said finally, opening his eyes. "Maybe humans just can't connect to four-lag artifacts this way. Or maybe we're approaching it wrong," Lyra suggested thoughtfully. "The bond formed through action, not meditation. Through choice and sacrifice, not ritual." She picked up the spear fragment, studying it in the dim light. "What were you feeling in that moment?" "Not thinking, but feeling." Kale considered the question seriously. "Anger," he admitted. "Not just at your attackers, but at the entire situation. The injustice of the arena, the crowd treating death like entertainment. And compassion, I guess. I saw someone fighting against impossible odds, refusing to surrender. Someone, not something," Lyra noted. "You saw me as a person, not an alien adversary." "Of course I did," Kale replied, somewhat confused by her emphasis. Lyra's expression softened. "That's rarer than you might think, especially between species with no history of peaceful contact. Most four-lag see humans as lesser beings, barely above animals. And I imagine many humans would view us as monsters. I've spent my life salvaging on the edges of space," Kale said. "You meet all kinds out there. After a while, you learn that sentience comes in many forms, but it always deserves respect." Something changed in the air between them, a subtle shift that Kale couldn't quite define, but definitely felt. The spear fragment in Lyra's hand seemed to pulse once with inner light. "That's it," she whispered. "The Kvar philosophy at its purest, before generations of warrior culture twisted it. My father used to say that our house rose to prominence not through conquest alone, but through the wisdom to recognize strength in diversity, to forge alliances where others saw only enemies." She placed the spear fragment back in Kale's hands. This time, he felt a distinct warmth spreading from the crystalline material into his fingers, up his arms, and throughout his body. The sensation wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it felt like a recognition and acknowledgement. "It's responding to you now," Lyra said, her voice tight with emotion. "The ancestral essence recognizes the truth in your heart. This is what my father hoped to restore to our house before Drazik murdered him." Throughout the night, they worked together to strengthen this connection. Lyra shared stories of her family's history, not just the battles and conquests that official records emphasized, but the moments of wisdom, mercy, and vision that had truly elevated House Kvar above others. With each story, Kale's bond with the spear fragment deepened, the crystalline material occasionally emitting soft pulses of light that illuminated their small chamber. By the time the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, Kale held the spear fragment with a new confidence. He couldn't explain exactly what had changed, but the weapon no longer felt foreign in his hand. It felt like an extension of his arm, responsive to his thoughts almost before he formed them. "It won't make you invincible," Lyra cautioned as they prepared to meet the day's challenge. "Drazik is a skilled warrior with decades of experience, but gives you a fighting chance." "A fighting chance is all I've ever asked for," Kale replied, securing the spear fragment to the simple staff the Temple Guardians had provided, effectively recreating a shorter version of the original weapon. They emerged from their quarters to find the temple complex transformed. Hundreds of Forlag had arrived during the night. Representatives from various houses and clans come to witness the unprecedented challenge. Many stared openly at Kale, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. The assembled spectators formed a path leading to the tallest of the 7 pyramids. At its summit, barely visible from ground level, a circular platform gleamed in the light of the approaching dawn. The female elder who had confirmed their bond approached, now dressed in even more elaborate ceremonial garb. She spoke formally to both of them. "She says the trial of ascension will combine elements of physical combat with tests of wisdom and spiritual strength," Lyra translated. "You and Drazik will climb to the sacred apex by different paths. Along the way, Each will face 3 challenges. The first to complete all challenges and reach the apex will have advantage in the final confrontation. Kale nodded his understanding, tightening his grip on the reassembled spear. And the rules of this final confrontation? After the elder responded, Lyra's expression grew solemn. Combat continues until submission or incapacitation. Death is not required for victory, but it is not forbidden. Of course it isn't, Kale muttered. Drazik arrived with his entourage, now dressed in traditional battle armor that emphasized his impressive physique. He carried an ancient-looking axe whose blade gleamed with the same crystalline properties as Lyra's spear. The Kfar battle axe, Lyra explained quietly. Another ancestral weapon, traditionally wielded by the house champion rather than its leader. He flaunts tradition by carrying it himself. The elder directed them to opposite sides of the pyramid, where separate staircases led upward. Before they parted, Lyra grasped Kale's arm. "Whatever happens," she said intently, "you have already done more for me than anyone in my life. You restored my faith that honor still exists in this universe." Kale wanted to say something meaningful in return, but his throat had gone dry with the reality of what he was about to face. Instead, he simply nodded, hoping his eyes conveyed what words couldn't. At the elder's signal, both challengers began their ascent. The stairway was steeper than it had appeared from below, each step requiring significant effort, especially in Xylos's higher gravity. Kale paced himself, aware that exhaustion would be as dangerous an enemy as Drazik. The first challenge appeared about a third of the way up, a section of stairs that suddenly shifted beneath his feet, individual steps rotating to create gaps that would send the unwary plummeting to serious injury or death. Kale froze momentarily, then began to discern the pattern. It wasn't random. The shifts followed a sequence that, once recognized, could be anticipated. Drawing on the newfound connection with the spear, he felt a strange clarity descend over his mind. The pattern became obvious, almost visible in the air before him. He moved forward with growing confidence, stepping, pausing, and jumping as needed to navigate the treacherous section. On the opposite side of the pyramid, he caught glimpses of Drazik facing a different, but presumably equivalent challenge. The four-lag warlord moved with the assurance of one who had trained for such tests his entire life. The second challenge emerged from recessed compartments in the pyramid's face, mechanical constructs of ancient design, resembling segmented metallic serpents that struck with alarming speed. Their fangs appeared to be tipped with some kind of sedative rather than lethal poison, suggesting the goal was incapacitation rather than death. Kale used the spear to fend them off, discovering that the crystalline tip disrupted whatever energy source powered the constructs. Each direct hit caused them to recoil momentarily, giving him the opening to advance another few steps. By the time he reached the final challenge, his breath was coming in ragged gasps, and sweat poured down his face despite the early hour. Across the pyramid, Drazik appeared to be equally taxed, though the four-lag's stamina clearly exceeded human limits. The third challenge proved the most daunting, a seemingly impassable barrier of energy that stretched across the stairway. It flickered with patterns reminiscent of the ceremonial scarification the four-lag elders bore, suggesting it responded to some aspect of their culture or history. Kale pressed the spear tip against the barrier experimentally. There was resistance, but no rejection. Drawing on everything Lyra had shared about her family's history and philosophy, he focused his thoughts on the core values that had supposedly defined House Kvar at its founding: honor, wisdom, vision, and respect for worthy adversaries regardless of origin. The barrier pulsed, its patterns shifting to match the rhythm of his thoughts. Gradually, it parted before him, creating just enough space for him to pass through if he moved carefully. With a final surge of effort, Kale emerged onto the sacred apex, a perfectly circular platform perhaps 30 feet in diameter, its surface inscribed with ancient symbols that spiraled inward toward a central point. The view was breathtaking, with the entire temple complex laid out below and the vast alien landscape of Xylos stretching to the horizon in all directions. He had only moments to appreciate the vista before Drazik emerged from his own stairway, looking, enraged that Kale had reached the summit first. Impossible, the four-lag warlord snarled. You cheated somehow. No human could navigate the sacred trials legitimately. Perhaps you've underestimated humans, Kale replied, trying to mask his exhaustion as he shifted into a defensive stance. Or perhaps House Kvar's ancestors value qualities you've forgotten. Drazik's response was a roar of fury as he charged, battle axe raised high. The final confrontation had begun. Kale barely deflected the first blow, the impact sending shockwaves up his arms despite the spear's strange properties. Drazik was immensely strong, each strike containing enough force to cleave a normal weapon or an unprotected human in two. But the reassembled spear held, and more than that, it seemed to guide Kale's movements, lending him a fluidity and precision he'd never possessed. He found himself anticipating Drazik's attacks, responding with counterstrikes that forced the larger warrior to give ground. Below, the assembled four-lag watched in stunned silence as the unprecedented duel unfolded. In the front row, Lyra stood rigid with tension, her eyes never leaving the two figures circling each other atop the ancient pyramid. Drazik, realizing that straightforward aggression was proving ineffective, changed tactics. He began to speak as they fought, his words designed to distract and demoralize. She's using you, human, he said between blows. Lyra has always been clever. She sees you as a tool, nothing more. Kale didn't respond, focusing on maintaining his defense while looking for openings. Our people will never accept you or her, Drazik continued. Even if by some miracle you defeat me, you'll both be dead within a cycle. There are other houses that share my vision for the four-leg. Purity, strength, dominance. Still, Kale fought in silence, though the words stirred doubts he'd kept suppressed. What was he really fighting for? A place in a society that would never truly accept him? A cause that wasn't his own? A woman who might indeed see him as merely a convenient ally? As if sensing his uncertainty, Drazik pressed harder, his axe coming dangerously close to Kale's defense. You don't belong here, human. You never will. Surrender now, and I'll grant you a quick death. Continue this farce, and I promise your suffering will be legendary. Something in Drazik's words, not the threat, but the underlying assumption, sparked a realization in Kale. This wasn't about belonging or acceptance. It had never been about that. It was about doing what was right, regardless of reward or recognition. The spear pulsed warmly in his hands, as if in confirmation. You're right about one thing, Kale finally responded, his voice steady despite his exertion. I don't belong here, but neither do you belong in a position of leadership. You've corrupted everything House Kvar once stood for. Lyra told me the histories, how her ancestors rose through wisdom as much as strength, how they recognized worthy allies among those others dismissed. He deflected another blow and countered with a strike that caught Drazik off guard, drawing first blood from a cut along the four-lag's arm. The spear accepted me not because I'm human or four-lag, Kale continued, finding new energy as clarity filled him, but because in that moment in the arena, I acted according to the true Kvar philosophy, judging worth by actions, not origin. Something you've forgotten in your obsession with power. Drazik's face contorted with rage. Sentimental nonsense. Strength rules. Always has, always will. He launched into a berserker attack, sacrificing defense for all-out aggression. The flurry of blows drove Kale backward toward the edge of the platform. One particularly vicious strike knocked him to one knee, his guard barely maintaining integrity against the onslaught. Drazik raised his axe for what he clearly intended as a finishing blow, triumph already spreading across his face. Die knowing you failed her, human. In that desperate moment, time seemed to slow. The spear in Kale's hands grew hot, not painfully but with a vital, living heat. Images flashed through his mind. Generations of Kvar leaders facing moments of crisis, making choices that defined not just their lives but the future of their house. He saw Lyra's father, so similar to her in feature and bearing, standing against corruption and intrigue. He saw Lyra herself, refusing to abandon her principles despite exile and dishonor. And he saw with perfect clarity what he needed to do. As Drazik's axe descended, Kale didn't try to block it directly. Instead, he rolled to the side, while simultaneously thrusting the spear upward at an angle that caught his opponent completely by surprise. The crystalline tip slid past Drazik's guard and into his shoulder. Not a killing blow, but one that rendered his dominant arm temporarily useless. The axe clattered to the platform as Drazik howled in pain and fury. Before he could recover, Kale was on his feet, the spear's point resting lightly against the four-lag warlord's throat. "Yield," Kale demanded, his voice carrying in the absolute silence that had fallen over the entire assembly. Drazik's eyes burned with hatred. "I would rather die than surrender to a human." "That can be arranged," Kale replied coldly. "But it would dishonor the traditions of the house you claim to protect. The trial doesn't demand death, only a victor and a resolution." For a long, tense moment, the two stared at each other, the fate of House Kvar hanging in the balance. Then, with obvious reluctance, Drazik lowered his gaze. "I yield," he growled, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. A collective gasp rose from the watchers below, followed by an outbreak of voices, some raised in protest, others in amazement. The elders moved forward as guardians rushed up the stairs to the platform. "It is done," the female elder proclaimed in heavily accented English, clearly intending her words to be understood by all present. "By the ancient law and the trial of ascension, leadership of House Kvar passes to the oath-sworn challenger. The ancestors have spoken through combat and trial." Drazik was escorted from the platform, his defeated posture a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. As he passed Kale, he muttered in a voice too low for others to hear, "This isn't over, human. Some traditions run deeper than even the elders know." Then Lyra was there, ascending the last steps to the platform with tears streaming openly down her face, a display of emotion rarely seen among the stoic forelag. Without hesitation, she embraced Kale, heedless of the watching crowd. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." "We did it," Kale corrected, suddenly aware of his exhaustion as the adrenaline began to fade. "I couldn't have understood any of this without you." The elder approached, and Lyra released him, both turning to face her with appropriate respect. According to tradition, the elder said, "As victor in the trial of ascension, you now lead House Kvar. However, as an off-worlder, you may designate a blood member of the house to rule in your stead while retaining the title and authority of oath-sworn protector." Kale didn't hesitate. "I name Lyra Kvar as ruler of House Kvar, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." The elder nodded, apparently having expected this decision. "So be it. Let it be recorded in the temple archives that on this day, leadership of House Kvar passed to Lyra Kvar, with Kale of Earth confirmed as her oath-sworn protector by right of trial and combat." As they descended the pyramid together, the watching forelag parted before them. Some bowed their heads in reluctant acknowledgement. Others simply stared in continued disbelief. A small group, those Kale assumed were allies of Drazik, glared in open hostility, but made no move against them under the watchful eyes of the temple guardians. "What happens now?" Kale asked quietly as they reached the bottom. Lyra surveyed the assembly, her expression thoughtful. "Now we face an even greater challenge, reforming a house that has lost its way in a society resistant to change. Drazik still has allies, both within our house and among the other noble families. This victory is significant, but it's only the beginning. And me? Do I just stay here? On Xylos?" The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. Earth seemed impossibly distant now, separated by not just space, but by the new bonds and responsibilities he had acquired. Lyra turned to him, her expression softening. "The bond between us is real, but it doesn't have to be a prison. As House Kvar regains its strength and influence, we could seek ways to establish contact with Earth, perhaps even find a way for you to return someday, if that's what you truly want." Kale looked around at the alien landscape, the strange twin suns overhead, the watching crowd of slate-skinned warriors. Then his gaze returned to Lyra, her determined eyes, her proud bearing, and something else he hadn't noticed before, a tentative hope that reminded him they were both outcasts in their own way, both fighting for a place where honor meant more than power. "I'm not sure what I want long-term," he admitted, "but for now I'm made an oath. And it seems to me that House Kvar could use an outside perspective as it finds its way back to its founding principles." Lyra's relief was visible. "Then we face the future together, oath sworn and house leader, reforming what was corrupted, reclaiming what was lost." The reassembled spear in Kale's hand caught the light of the twin suns, the crystalline tip flashing with an inner fire that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Whatever path lay ahead, he knew with certainty that nothing would ever be the same. For him, for Lyra, or for the Forlag society that had unwittingly set these events in motion when a human had raised a broken spear to protect a fallen warrior.